Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. We are beginning to emerge from a long year of isolation and political polarization. It has been a difficult time that has also shed light on intractable problems that will take time and cooperation to unravel and correct. To talk about how we might move forward with our neighbors to a better future, we welcome back Susan Clark, a writer and educator focusing on community sustainability and engagement. She is co-author of Slow Democracy, Rediscovering Community, Bringing Decision-Making Back Home, and All Those in Favor, a book about Vermont town meetings. Clark is also a facilitator and town moderator of Middlesex. Thank you so much for joining us again, Susan.
Thanks for having me, Fran.
So I heard you on a recent talk speak about how humans have a natural tendency toward polarization. Can you explain that a little bit?
Yeah, brain scientists now understand what happens inside our brains when we receive new information, especially information that doesn't uh, support our point of view. And there have been experiments where uh, groups of Republicans and Democrats were wired up with brain scans, and then they were offered unflattering information about their own party's candidates. And according to their MRIs, when people received information that contradicted their biases, their brains actually underprocessed the information. So the section of the brain responsible for conscious reasoning, the prefrontal cortex, hardly even fired. And instead, the emotional circuits of the brain lit up. So basically, our brains are built to use emotion to ignore information that we don't want to hear, but we can't discount intellectually. And in fact, when we do this, we reinforce our beliefs. The reward centers of our brains light up. So it's like a drug.
Yeah,
We get a hit every time we ignore information that challenges our worldview.
wow, we're kind of suckers for like black and white. And if this is how we are wired to some degree, how do we move forward and come together to solve those wicked, complex problems together?
Right. Because, in the case of liberal and conservative worldviews, we aren't just talking about opinions. We're talking about things that we're born with. These are qualities that we're born with. So they're part of our identities. We're wired to defend them. And evolutionarily, that's been good, right? It helps, build teams, which has been good for humans to survive, but it's really terrible for solving problems because a lot of today's topics are what you just mentioned, wicked problems. Issues like climate or immigration or economic inequality, they have underlying competing values. And if you think about how we try to solve problems, usually it's with expertise or activism. But wicked problems are different. They don't respond to expertise or to activism as much as, and actually those adversarial us versus them fights actually make them worse. But what they do respond to is slow, trusting, face-to-face communication. So with wicked problems, we have to remember that it's the problem that's wicked and not the people.
And a curiosity and these things make a big difference. So what was also interesting is you talked about some researchers who have developed ways to look at what some might call the two Vermonts. And maybe if we understand those two very general groups a bit better, we can also be more thoughtful about how to communicate with each other.
Right. Yeah. Well, Paul Searles, a Northern Vermont University historian, wrote a book called Two Vermonts. And what he was talking about was that in Vermont history, sort of 1865 to 1910, there was a split emerging between two Vermont populations. And he calls them the uphillers and the downhillers. And if you sort of think of uphillers as kind of hill farmers, these are folks who valued local cooperative relationships, self-reliant, egalitarians. They sort of operate on a handshake. Whereas downhillers, if you think of, the mill owners, villagers, these are folks who valued like efficiency and competition, more formal contractual relationships, and more comfortable with concentrating power in larger institutions. And, if you sort of think of an example, if your neighbor's dog is barking, who do you call? Well, if you call your neighbor, that's more of an uphill tendency. But if you call the animal control officer, that's sort of more of a downhill tendency. And we need both of these kinds of people, and these values continue today. And each of us has a mix, of both of them. But if you sort of think of, different political examples like Act 46, the school consolidation bill, the idea that for efficiency you should merge school districts from the top down. It's a very sort of downhill notion, and uphill values like local involvement and small scale decision making. They're often not really respected or even understood, by downhillers. And we talked about also it's not just Vermont. This idea that your identity is defined in part in relationship to community. It also has resonance with other research. For example, in England, David Goodhart's work. He calls two groups the somewheres and the anywheres. And again, it's about place. That the somewheres understand the world through long-term relationships to place like farming or mining or local industry, and they value tradition and family and community, and they often prefer change to be more moderate than really rapid. Whereas anywheres are more like the cosmopolitan elite. They have what's called and anywhere is like an achieved identity, and it's based on like education and career success, and they're comfortable with change and they can live anywhere. So the somewhere anywhere tension is anywheres are comfortable with change. In fact, they kind of do want to change things, and what's right for them it's right for everyone. And anywhere kind of assumes that a somewhere is just someone who is a person who isn't an anywhere yet, right? But these are not lightly held preferences. These are worldviews. These are identities. And
assumptions, assumptions that we make about one or the other.
About each other, exactly. And if we kind of assume that a somewhere is just somebody who hasn't become like in anywhere yet, it's nostalgic, or that can come off as disrespect. And but they have critical strengths: volunteerism, local engagement, trust. These are for centuries have allowed our communities to regulate selfishness, and so the lack of understanding between these two worldviews can help explain some of the sort of angry backlash that we see with supporters of Brexit and Trump.
So, so these are ways that we are different and have different values. What about Vermont culture and traditions bring us all together?
Yes, that's a great question. There's so many great things. One of them is the climate, okay? And we all know Vermont is a hard place to live, right? We share that. I mean, winter is finally, I think, over here in Vermont. I've just got daffodils outside, and we can all feel that, right? We can feel it in our hearts. And when somebody tells me that they've just survived their first Vermont winter, I can share that celebration with them. Or if they tell me that they've been here for a decade, well, that's 10 winters, right? Or if they tell me their family's been here for 7 generations, that really means something. Or if they tell me that they're a Native American, each of these statements is embedded with meaning. So our climate is an opportunity to connect. Another one is our scale. I mean, we're clustered in these small human scale communities. And when you look outside Vermont, it makes you realize how special we are, that, over 61% of Vermonters live in towns of under 2,500. And that gives us an opportunity to know our neighbors. And we also, of course, have this wonderful, you mentioned in the book about town meeting, our town meeting inheritance. These are our little tiny legislatures where we govern ourselves through direct democracy, year after year, decade after decade, century after century, right? It's changed our democratic DNA, our expectations about how we can and must come together to make decisions.
So these are ways we're the same and there are differences. So what do we need to think about to move forward in this continually changing future that seems to be ours now?
Right, yes. And change comes, Vermont is going to welcome new populations. We always have. We're going to continue to do that. And I think it helps for Vermonters to remember what it feels like to be the other. To be, that too, Vermont's history reminds us that at one time or another, most of us have experienced, being left out or feeling misunderstood. Rather than criticize those differences that we have, let's lift up what's best about our communities. We're not perfect. Vermonters aren't perfect, but we have helped each other through a lot, and we know how to do this.
Yeah, certainly with Irene, much less the pandemic, I think about, and civility is so important, and you have this set of questions that help open our curiosity and our hearts to different perspectives, and would you share those?
Sure. Yeah, these are Conversation Cafe. You can see these little cards. They're wallet sized. You can have one, ready with you anytime. So the next time you're in a conversation that's, on the verge of becoming uncivil, you can try asking these questions that go a little deeper. So, what happened that led you to this point of view? You can ask that question.
Hmm.
How does this affect you personally? I'm curious. Can you say more about that? Here's what I heard. Is that what you mean? So these questions kind of help us take a breath and try to discover the concerns beneath the positions that someone is saying. So rather than convincing or winning, we can focus on understanding. And in strengthening our communities, there's really no more powerful tool than listening.
Absolutely. I think I'd start, because I'm an interviewer, with I'm curious. I think that's such an important place to start. Can you say more about that? What does that mean? So we come to understand, and we're curious before, like, well, what happened to lead you there? Which isn't really confrontational, but could be taken that way. But
It can be. You can ask it as ask them to tell you a story.
yeah.
So rather than yes but, start with yes and.
Right. Well, we just have a minute, so I just want to let people know you can find out more about Susan Clark and these ideas at slowdemocracy.org. And just quickly, can you explain what slow democracy means to you?
Yeah, well, that's the name of our book, and it's all about local decision making that involves everyone in the community. People making a difference. So we tell stories from lots of different places across the United States, and this is where people have really put their heads together to kind of bridge, divides, and come up with creative new solutions together.
Fantastic. Susan Clark, thank you so much for your work and taking time to explain some of this to us today, and you help us towards a brighter future. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
And thank you for joining us across the fence. I'm Fran Stoddard. Stay well.